The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council had witnessed countless declarations of war, peace treaties, and territorial disputes across 3 millennia. But today, something different filled the air, a tension so thick it seemed to vibrate through the translucent walls. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthek Empire stood at the central podium, his 6 arms trembling slightly as he gripped the speaking stone. Around him, representatives from 137 worlds watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. The Vorthek had once commanded respect in these halls. Their empire had stretched across 14 star systems, their fleets had been feared throughout the outer spiral arms, and their military doctrine had been studied in academies across the galaxy. Now, Zethkar represented little more than scattered refugee colonies and the bitter taste of absolute defeat. Honored delegates, Zethkar began, his voice carrying the weight of countless sleepless cycles. I stand before you today not as a conqueror, not as a negotiator, but as a survivor bearing witness to the most catastrophic military miscalculation in recorded galactic history. A ripple of amused chittering came from the Krillian delegation. Ambassador Nexus, a mantis-like creature with gleaming compound eyes, clicked his mandibles dismissively. The mighty Vorthek Empire, reduced to storytelling? Perhaps you should have invested more in fleet construction and less in dramatic presentations. Zethkar's main eyes fixed on Nexus with an intensity that silenced the chamber. Fleet construction, he repeated slowly. We had 12,000 ships of the line, dreadnoughts that could crack moons, carriers housing fighter wings that blotted out stars. We had conquered species that your kind still whisper about in fearful legends. Had emphasized Counselor Yextai of the Hegemony, her serpentine form coiled elegantly around her council seat. Past tense, Vorthek. What does this have to do with current galactic affairs? Zethkar activated the holographic display at the chamber's center. A 3-dimensional map of the local galactic cluster materialized, showing trade routes, military installations, and territorial boundaries. At the edge of the display, almost insignificant in its isolation, pulsed a small blue-green world. This, Zethkar said, pointing with 2 of his arms, is Earth, home to a species called humans. They achieved basic spaceflight roughly 50 of 8 years ago. They possess no faster-than-light communication networks. Their weapons technology is centuries behind galactic standards. Their population barely reaches 8 billion individuals. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Delegate Vrexoth of the Trade Federation leaned forward, his gaseous form shimmering with bewilderment. Are you suggesting that this primitive world somehow defeated the Vorthek Empire? Not defeated, Zethkar corrected, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Annihilated. Completely. Systematically. With a thoroughness that still keeps me awake during rest cycles. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ever-present hum of the Council's translation matrices seemed to fade. Zethkar manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on Earth until its continental formations became visible. We first encountered humans 3 standard years ago, he continued. Our initial assessment classified them as a Class 7 civilization, barely worthy of vassalage, let alone direct conquest. Their ships were chemical rockets that moved at laughably slow speeds. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and primitive energy beams. We observed them from a distance for several cycles, documenting their technology, their social structures, their military capabilities. Zethkar paused, his breathing apparatus cycling heavily. What we fail to understand, what no species in this chamber truly understands, is that technological superiority means nothing when faced with a species that simply refuses to accept defeat. The display shifted, showing archived footage of human cities, their sprawling urban centers and vast agricultural regions. The humans had been monitoring our observation ships for months. They knew we were there, studying them, cataloging their weaknesses. Most species, when faced with clearly superior technology, would attempt diplomatic contact or prepare defensive measures. And the humans? Asked Counselor Yextai, though something in her tone suggested she already feared the answer. The humans, Zethkar said, began building weapons designed specifically to kill us. He manipulated the display again, showing grainy surveillance footage of massive construction projects across Earth's surface. Underground facilities, orbital platforms, and strange geometric structures that defied conventional military architecture. We interpreted this as typical primitive posturing. After all, what could they possibly create that would threaten vessels capable of planetary bombardment? Our intelligence suggested their most advanced spacecraft couldn't even reach their own moon reliably. The truth of his next words seemed to physically pain him. We decided to demonstrate the futility of resistance by destroying one of their major population centers. A simple show of force to encourage immediate surrender. We targeted a city called New York, approximately 8 million inhabitants. The bombardment fleet consisted of 3 heavy cruisers and a command carrier. The chamber waited in perfect silence. None of those ships returned, Zefkar said. Within 6 standard hours of beginning the bombardment, all 4 vessels had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The humans had somehow weaponized their planet's gravitational field, turning it into a massive kinetic launcher. They fired their own moon at our ships. The stunned silence stretched for nearly a full minute before Ambassador Nexus found his voice. That's impossible. No species develops gravitational manipulation technology without first mastering faster-than-light travel. I have the sensor logs, Zefkar replied grimly. I have the testimonies of the 17 survivors we managed to evacuate from the debris field. I have the tactical analysis that still makes no sense to our greatest military minds. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates who suddenly seemed far less certain of their own superiority. That was just the beginning. The holographic display flickered as Zefkar accessed deeper archive files, his movement becoming more agitated with each passing moment. The delegates watched in fascination and growing unease as footage of massive space battle began playing in the chamber's center. After losing the bombardment fleet, our high command assumed the humans had deployed some sort of experimental defensive system. Zefkar continued. Perhaps they had discovered ancient technology or received assistance from an unknown benefactor. The logical response was to return with overwhelming force. The display showed the assembly of what could only be described as an armada. Hundreds of Vorthak vessels, from sleek destroyers to massive siege platforms, gathered in formation around a colossal command ship that dwarfed most space stations. Fleet Admiral Kexthal commanded personally, Zefkar said, his voice carrying a note of reverence mixed with horror. 700 ships of the line. Enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. We approached the human system with every intention of ending this minor inconvenience quickly and decisively. Counselor Yextai Serpentine form had gone completely still. 700 ships against a primitive world. Even allowing for their defensive capabilities, the outcome should have been certain. It was certain, Zefkar agreed, just not in the way we expected. The footage shifted to tactical displays showing the Vorthak fleet's approach to Earth's solar system. Everything appeared normal at first. Standard formation flying, sensor sweeps detecting no immediate threats, preliminary bombardment positions being established. The humans were waiting for us, Zefkar said quietly. Not with ships. They still had no vessels capable of engaging us in traditional space combat. Instead, they had spent a month since our first attack doing something that still defies all military logic. The display zoomed in on what appeared to be empty space between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Suddenly, the void began to glimmer with thousands of tiny reflective objects, each no larger than a human fist. Kinetic mines, Zefkar explained. Millions of them, scattered throughout the system and accelerated to significant fractions of light speed using a network of magnetic launches they had constructed on every solid body in their star system. Each mine was essentially a ball of compressed matter moving at velocities that turned them into relativistic weapons. Delegate Vrexother's gaseous form began shifting colors rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. Impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the output of most stellar civilizations. The humans had converted their entire planet into a weapons factory, Zefkar replied. They dismantled their cities, melted down their infrastructure, and conscripted every individual capable of contributing to the war effort. In 6 months, they transformed from a peaceful exploration-focused civilization to the most militarized society our analysts had ever encountered. The tactical display showed the moment of contact. The elegant Vorthak formation suddenly began disintegrating as invisible projectiles tore through their ranks. Ships that had survived centuries of warfare exploded in brilliant flashes as relativistic impacts released energies equivalent to antimatter weapons. The mines were just the opening move. Zethkar continued, his voice becoming hollow. As our formation scattered, the humans activated their true trap. The display shifted to show Earth itself, now surrounded by complex orbital infrastructure that definitely hadn't existed during their first encounter. Massive ring structures encircled the planet, crackling with energy that made even the chamber's hardened translation systems flicker. They had built a planetary acceleration grid, Zethkar said, using their world's magnetic field and a series of precisely positioned momentum transfer stations. They could accelerate objects launched from the surface to significant fractions of light speed. But that wasn't the terrifying part. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that had gone from skeptical to genuinely frightened. The terrifying part was realizing that every projectile they fired was carefully calculated to disable rather than destroy our ships. They wanted prisoners. They wanted our technology. They wanted to learn everything we knew about galactic civilization, and they were willing to cripple an entire fleet to get it. The footage showed Vorthak ships, their engines destroyed and life support failing, being drawn into Earth's gravity well by massive magnetic tethers. Boarding pods launched from the planet's surface, each one filled with humans in primitive but effective combat armor. The boarding actions were unlike anything in our military databases, Zethkar said. Humans don't fight like any other species we had encountered. They don't retreat when faced with superior numbers. They don't surrender when their positions become untenable. They adapt, they improvise, and they never, ever stop coming. He manipulated the display to show internal ship footage, corridors filled with desperate combat as human boarding parties advanced through Vorthak vessels with mechanical precision. What should have been quick raids to gather intelligence turned into systematic conquest of entire ships. Within 18 standard hours, the humans had captured 43 vessels and taken over 8,000 prisoners. Zethkar continued. They interrogated our crews with a methodical thoroughness that revealed not just our military capabilities, but our political structures, our trade networks, our diplomatic relationships, everything. Ambassador Nexus had gone completely still, his compound eyes reflecting the light from the display. They were gathering intelligence for a broader conflict. No, Zethkar said, and his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on the entire chamber. They were preparing for war, not just with us, but with any species that might threaten them in the future. The humans had concluded that the galaxy was a hostile place, and they intended to make sure they would never again be caught unprepared. The display showed the final moments of the battle, the few surviving Vorthak ships retreating in disorder while human-controlled vessels began pursuing them, modified with captured technology and crewed by boarding parties that had learned to operate alien systems in a matter of hours. That was 2 standard years ago, Zethkar said. The retreating ships brought word of our defeat back to the Empire. Our leadership, convinced that the humans had received outside assistance, began preparing for a full-scale invasion. They assembled every vessel we possessed, called in our allies, and prepared to crush this upstart species with the full might of 14 star systems. The chamber remained silent, but the tension was palpable. We should have listened to the survivors who warned us that the humans weren't just defending themselves anymore. Zethkar said quietly, they were hunting us. The holographic display darkened for a moment before illuminating again with star charts showing the Vorthak Empire at its height, 14 systems connected by a web of trade routes and military corridors. The assembled delegates studied the tactical overview with professional interest, but Zethkar's next word sent a chill through the chamber. The human pursuit fleet reached our first outer colonies exactly 4 to 7 standard days after the battle of their homeworld, he said. By then, we had convinced ourselves that we were dealing with a limited force, perhaps a few captured ships with human crews who barely understood the technology they were operating. The star chart began to change, red markers appearing at the edge of Vorthak space. Kennex Prime was our first military outpost. Zethkar continued. A fortress world with orbital defense platforms and a permanent garrison of 30,000 troops. The system commander sent routine reports until communications went dark during what should have been a normal patrol cycle. Counselor Yextai Serpentine Form had coiled tighter around her council seat. Equipment failure? Natural phenomenon. We sent a reconnaissance fleet to investigate, Zethkar replied. What they found defied every principle of interstellar warfare. The display shifted to show Kennex Prime, but something was fundamentally wrong with the image. The planet's surface appeared normal, but the orbital infrastructure, massive defense stations, shipyards, and military installations had simply vanished. The entire defensive grid had been dismantled, Zethkar explained. Not destroyed, dismantled, piece by piece, component by component, with surgical precision. The humans had somehow convinced our own automated systems to disassemble themselves and load their components onto transport vessels. Delegate Vrexother's gaseous form had gone completely still. That would require intimate knowledge of Vorthak computer architectures. Knowledge they had extracted from the crews they captured during the Oath battle, Zethkar confirmed. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The garrison was gone, all 30,000 troops, but there were no signs of battle, no casualties, no evidence of resistance. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of translation matrices struggling to process the implications. They had been recruited, Zethkar said simply. The humans had somehow convinced 30,000 Vorthak soldiers to abandon their posts and join the human fleet. We found video messages left behind by our own troops, explaining their decision to defect to what they called a species that fights to protect rather than conquer. Ambassador Nexus's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Impossible. Vorthak military conditioning prevents such mass defection. The humans had learned to reverse our conditioning protocols, Zethkar replied. They understood our psychology better than we understood it ourselves. Every interrogation, every captured database, every prisoner exchange had given them insight into how our minds worked. They knew exactly which psychological pressure points would cause our troops to question their loyalty. The star chart continued to evolve, red markers spreading deeper into Vorthak space like an infection. Over the next 6 months, the pattern repeated itself across 12 systems. The humans would arrive, systematically dismantle our defenses, recruit our personnel, and appropriate our technology. They weren't conquering. They were assimilating everything useful while leaving the civilian populations completely unharmed. The display zoomed in on individual colony worlds, showing before and after images that told the same story repeatedly. Military installations gone. Defensive fleets missing, but cities and civilian infrastructure left completely intact. By the time our high command recognized the true scope of the threat, the humans controlled more Vorthak military assets than we did. Zethkar continued. They had turned our own expansion strategy against us, using our network of colonies and bases as stepping stones to penetrate deeper into the Empire. Counselor Yextai's voice carried a note of professional curiosity mixed with horror. How were they coordinating operations across such vast distances? You said they lacked faster-than-light communication. They had captured our communication networks along with everything else, Zethkar replied. But more than that, they had improved them. Human engineers working with defected Vorthak technicians had enhanced our systems beyond anything we thought possible. They were coordinating fleet movements across the entire Empire in real time while we were still using courier ships to relay basic orders. The star chart showed the final phase of the campaign, a coordinated assault on the Vorthak homeworld itself. But instead of the massive fleet action that traditional military doctrine would suggest, the displays showed something far more sophisticated. The attack on Vorthak Prime wasn't a battle, Zethkar said. It was a demonstration. The humans had spent months infiltrating our home system, using captured ships and converted personnel. By the time we realized what was happening, they controlled our orbital infrastructure, our planetary defense grid, and our government communication networks. The footage shifted to show the Vorthak capital, a sprawling metropolis of crystalline spires and floating platforms. But instead of destruction, the images showed something unprecedented. Human negotiators walking through the streets under escort by Vorthak civilians who seemed genuinely curious rather than terrified. They offered us terms, Zethkar said quietly. Complete amnesty for all civilian populations, full autonomy for colony worlds that wish to maintain independence, and integration into what they called a defensive alliance for any systems that wanted to join their expanding coalition. The silence in the chamber was profound. The terms were more generous than anything we had ever offered to conquered species, Zethkar continued. But they came with one non-negotiable requirement, the complete dissolution of our military command structure and the permanent exile of anyone who had been involved in the decision to attack Earth. The display showed the signing ceremony, Vorthak leaders formally surrendering not to human conquerors, but to a coalition that included dozens of their own former colonies and military commanders who had chosen to join the human cause. That was 8 months ago, Zethkar said. Today, the former Vorthak Empire exists as 17 independent systems, 6 of which have joined the Human Defensive Alliance, while the remainder maintain friendly relations through trade agreements that are more favorable than anything we ever negotiated as conquerors. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates whose expressions had shifted from skepticism to genuine fear. The humans kept their word completely, Zethkar said. Every promise, every guarantee, every term of the agreement has been honored to the letter. Our civilian populations are more prosperous now than they were under our own rule. Our former colonies report higher standards of living and greater political autonomy than they ever enjoyed as part of our empire. Ambassador Nexus found his voice first. Then why are you here warning us? If the humans are such benevolent conquerors? Because they are not conquerors at all, Zethkar interrupted. They are survivors. And everything they've done, every ship they've captured, every alliance they've forged, every technology they've acquired, has been in service of a single goal. The chamber waited, making sure that no species ever again makes the mistake of attacking Earth. The holographic display shifted to show current galactic positioning, with new markers indicating the spread of human influence across what had once been Vorthak space. But these weren't conquest markers. They were defensive installations, trade agreements, and mutual protection pacts that form an intricate web of interconnected systems. The human expansion isn't driven by ambition, Zethkar continued, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned understanding. It's driven by absolute, uncompromising paranoia. They have concluded that the galaxy is filled with species who will eventually threaten Earth, and they intend to be ready. Delegate Vrexother's gaseous form had begun shifting through a spectrum of colors that indicated deep contemplation. You're suggesting they view every contact as a potential future enemy. I'm suggesting they view every contact as a potential future threat that must be neutralized before it becomes actual danger, Zethkar corrected. The humans don't think in terms of traditional conquest or territorial expansion. They think in terms of threat assessment and preemptive response. The display zoomed in on several systems that showed heavy human activity, massive construction projects, expanded sensor networks, and what appeared to be entirely new classes of spacecraft. Since absorbing our technology and personnel, the humans have expanded their capabilities exponentially. They are not just building defensive systems. They are creating infrastructure for conflict that spans the entire galaxy. Counselor Yexdai's coiled form had gone completely motionless. What kind of infrastructure? Manufacturing centers capable of producing fleets in timeframes that defy conventional industrial planning, Zethkar replied. Training facilities where humans and converted alien personnel develop new tactics for fighting species they've never encountered. Research installations where they are not just studying captured technology, but improving it beyond the original specifications. The footage showed orbital platforms around Earth that had grown into structures rivaling small moons. Construction fleets worked continuously, building ships designed according to principles that seemed to incorporate the best elements of dozens of different alien technologies. But the most disturbing development, Zethkar continued, is their intelligence network. The humans have established monitoring stations throughout their expanding territory, but they are not just watching for military threats. They are studying every aspect of galactic civilization, our trade patterns, our diplomatic relationships, our cultural exchanges, our technological developments. He manipulated the display to show communication intercepts and data analysis centers where humans worked alongside defected aliens from multiple species. They know more about galactic affairs than most council members. They understand our individual military capabilities, our alliance structures, our economic dependencies, and our political vulnerabilities. Ambassador Nexus's compound eyes had gone completely dark, a defensive response that indicated extreme stress. You're describing a species preparing for total war against the entire galaxy. No, Zethkar said, and his correction carried surprising conviction. I'm describing a species preparing to survive total war against the entire galaxy. The humans genuinely believe that eventually some combination of galactic powers will decide that Earth represents an unacceptable threat and move to eliminate them preemptively. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of environmental systems. And they are not wrong, Zefka added quietly. I've heard the discussions in these chambers. The concerns about human expansion, the proposal for containment strategies, the suggestions that perhaps the Council should take action before the humans become too powerful to control. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The humans monitor our communications, Zefka continued. They know about every council session, every diplomatic exchange, every military planning meeting that mentions Earth or human activities. They are not paranoid, they are informed, and everything they've learned confirms their worst fears about galactic civilization. The display showed intercepted transmissions from various council member worlds, military assessments, diplomatic correspondence, and strategic planning documents that all focus on the growing human presence. From their perspective, Zefka explained, they are surrounded by hundreds of species who view them as an existential threat, while they themselves have no aggressive intentions toward anyone. They see themselves as forced into a defensive posture by galactic powers who refuse to accept their right to exist unmolested. Councillor Yextai's voice carried a note of growing alarm. What you're describing sounds like the prelude to a galactic war that could devastate civilization itself. It is, Zefka confirmed, and the humans are preparing to win it. Not because they want to, but because they concluded that it's inevitable and that their survival depends on ensuring they are ready when it begins. The display shifted to show tactical analyses that made even experienced military minds struggle to comprehend their implications. Human fleet compositions that incorporated the best elements of a dozen different military traditions, defensive installations that could probably withstand sustained bombardment by entire star fleets, and research projects aimed at developing weapon systems that most species hadn't even imagined. The humans have identified every potential threat in the galaxy, Zefka continued. They know which species possess planet-killing weapons, which civilizations have the industrial capacity for sustained warfare, which alliance structures could potentially threaten Earth, and they are developing specific countermeasures for each scenario. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that had gone pale with realization. But here's what makes the humans truly dangerous, Zefka said. They don't just plan to survive the coming conflict, they plan to ensure it never happens again. Every military installation they build, every alliance they forge, every technology they develop is designed not just for defense, but for the complete transformation of galactic civilization. The chamber remained silent, but the tension was becoming unbearable. The humans intend to create a galaxy where no species will ever again have the capability to threaten another species' homeworld, Zefka explained. They are not building an empire, they are building a framework for permanent peace enforced by absolute deterrence. Ambassador Nexus found his voice, though it carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. And if the galaxy refuses to accept this framework? Zefka's response was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. Then the humans will impose it by force, and they have spent the last 2 years ensuring they have the capability to do exactly that. The weight of Zefka's words settled over the council chamber like a suffocating blanket. The holographic display had gone dark, leaving only the pale illumination of the chamber's crystalline walls to light the faces of delegates who were beginning to understand the true scope of what they were facing. 3 days ago, Zefka continued, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing, I received a personal communication from Earth. Not through official diplomatic channels, not as part of any formal negotiation, but as a direct message from the human leadership to the Galactic Council. He activated a new hologram, showing the image of a human female with graying hair and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of impossible decisions. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, Supreme Commander of Human Defense Operations. She asked me to deliver a message to this council, and I agreed because I believe it represents our last chance to avoid a conflict that will reshape the galaxy. The image shifted to show Admiral Chen seated in what appeared to be a command center of staggering complexity, with tactical displays showing real-time positions of fleets across multiple star systems. The message is simple, Zefka said. Humanity formally requests admission to the Galactic Council as a recognized civilization with all the rights and protections that membership entails. They wish to participate in galactic governance, contribute to collective security efforts, and engage in peaceful trade and cultural exchange with all member species. Councillor Yextai's serpentine form had begun to uncoil slightly. That seems reasonable. Certainly preferable to the alternatives you've described. The message continues. Zethkar said grimly, if the Council chooses to reject humanity's application for membership, or if any Council member species attempt to take preemptive action against human interests, then humanity will consider such actions to be declarations of war against Earth and will respond accordingly. The chamber erupted in alarmed chatter that took several minutes to subside. But here's what makes this more than just another military threat. Zethkar continued once silence had returned. The humans have provided a complete tactical assessment of their current capabilities as proof that their warning should be taken seriously. The holographic display lit up with data streams that made even the most advanced military minds in the chamber struggle to process the information. Fleet compositions numbering in the tens of thousands, industrial capabilities that exceeded most star empires, and technological innovations that seemed to violate several fundamental principles of physics. They have 17 fully operational planet killers, Zethkar said matter-of-factly, each one capable of sterilizing a world from outside its system's heliopause. They have infiltration networks in 87 Council-member civilizations. They have detailed tactical plans for neutralizing every major military installation in the galaxy. And they have the industrial capacity to replace their entire fleet 3 times over within a standard year. Delegate Vrexother's gaseous form had gone completely colorless. This is impossible. No single species could achieve such capabilities in such a short time frame. No single species, Zethkar agreed, but the humans aren't operating as a single species anymore. They've created a coalition that includes defected personnel from 43 different civilizations, each contributing their unique expertise to the human war machine. They've essentially turned the galaxy's own diversity against it. The display showed construction footage from human facilities, vast shipyard where humans worked alongside Vorthak engineers, Krillian tactical specialists, and representatives from dozens of other species who had chosen to join the human cause. Every species that has chosen to ally with humanity has done so voluntarily, Zethkar emphasized. The humans don't conquer, they convince. They offer something that most galactic civilizations have never experienced, genuine partnership in defensive alliance where smaller species aren't treated as vassals or resources. Ambassador Nexus had begun clicking his mandibles in a pattern that indicated deep contemplation. You're suggesting that humanity has succeeded in creating the kind of truly cooperative galactic civilization that the Council has been attempting to establish for millennia. I'm suggesting that humanity has created a galactic civilization based on mutual defense rather than mutual exploitation, Zethkar corrected. And they've done it by demonstrating that they are willing and able to protect their allies from any threat, no matter how powerful. The holographic display shifted one final time, showing current galactic positioning with human influence marked in blue, Council territories in various other colors, and neutral zones in gray. The pattern was striking. Human influence had spread throughout nearly a third of the galaxy, but in a web-like structure that suggested connection rather than conquest. The humans are offering the Council a choice, Zethkar said. Accept them as equals and work together to create a galaxy where no species need to fear extinction at the hands of another, or continue with the current system and face the consequences when they decide that the threat to Earth has become unacceptable. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before Councillor Yextai found her voice. And if we choose the first option, what guarantees do we have that humanity won't simply use Council membership to impose their will on the galaxy? Zethkar's response was immediate and carried absolute conviction. Because the humans have already proven that they could impose their will whenever they choose to do so. The fact that they are asking for permission instead of simply taking what they want is the only guarantee you need. He looked around the chamber one final time, meeting the eyes of delegates who were struggling to process the magnitude of the choice before them. I have lived through the collapse of an empire that thought it could intimidate humanity into submission, Zethkar said. I have seen firsthand what happens when a species makes a mistake of believing that humans are just another primitive civilization that can be bullied or conquered. I have watched my own people discover that everything we thought we knew about warfare, diplomacy, and galactic politics was wrong. The chamber remained silent. But I have also seen what happens when a species chooses to work with humanity instead of against them, Zethkar continued. I have watched former enemies become allies, seen conquered worlds become prosperous partners, and witnessed a creation of a defensive network that actually protects its members instead of simply exploiting them. He stepped back from the podium, his 6 arms spread in a gesture that encompassed the entire assembly. The choice is yours, honored delegates. But remember this, humanity didn't ask for this conflict. They didn't seek to become a galactic power. They didn't want to build the largest military force in recorded history. All of this happened because one species made the mistake of believing that humans would accept subjugation quietly. Zethkar's final words echoed through the chamber with the weight of absolute truth. Do not make the same mistake my people made. Do not provoke the humans. Their retaliation truly is legendary, and you do not want to discover what they are capable of when they stop asking for permission and start taking what they need to ensure their survival. The holographic display faded to darkness, leaving the council chamber in silence as 137 civilizations contemplated the most important decision in galactic history.